Hello, friends. I'm Amity back again with a new episode of Business Line's State of the Economy podcast. Our topic of discussion today is the proposed free trade agreement between India and the UK. Both the governments in India and the UK are putting their combined weight behind concluding the proposed FTA negotiations by the year end. An estimated four-fifths of the pact is said to have been sorted out at the 10th negotiating round last month, according to some officials. However, contentious areas such as tariff reduction for Scotch whisky and automobiles, rules on intellectual property rights, the issues of financial services, mutual recognition agreements and services, etc., are yet to be ironed out. Commerce and Industry Minister Piyush Goyal was in London on July 10th to 12th, where he held talks with UK Secretary of State for Trade, Kemi Badenoch, on the FTA. According to a government statement, considerable progress was achieved on various difficult issues related to the FTA during the discussion. We have with us today Dr. Biswajit Dhar, trade expert and former professor at the JNU, to explain various aspects of the India-UK FTA. Dr. Dhar, welcome back to Business Line State of the Economy podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
To start with, could you explain what the UK and India are set to achieve with this, free trade agreement? What do the countries individually hope to gain out of this?
I think both countries are looking forward to getting substantial market access in each other's countries. In fact, over the decades, trade relations between India and UK have become, they've become substantially less than what used to be. Just to give you a set of numbers, case of India, UK used to be India's third largest trading partner in the year 2000-2001. In 2021, it was down to 14th. So there's substantial decrease in UK's importance as India's trade partner. And for the UK, India is the 12th largest trade partner, and it's sort of remained thereabouts for the past 2 decades. So I think what is important for both India and UK is really to improve these numbers because of the size of their economies and the markets they offer. Therefore, there's substantial trade potential that could be exploited in each other's countries. Now, UK, after leaving the European Union, is trying to find its feet. Let me put it this way. It hasn't yet found its foot, given the kind of crisis that it has gone through. But in the medium long run, it really is trying to establish itself as a major trading power. And what a better opportunity to realize this objective than to seal a deal with India and secure significant market access in India. So for both the countries, so the country UK and India, it's seen as a win-win situation, and they would like to harness the complementarities that exist and secure a better deal for the country and businesses and the people.
Right. It is said that a large part of the negotiations have been successfully completed. But, there are areas like it is said that, always the toughest is there for the last. So what, according to you, are the issues, where consensus could be elusive, where it could be a problem to arrive at, something that is acceptable to both sides?
Yeah, I think, issues on tariffs are never behind you until it is finally sealed. And it actually happens near the conclusion of any negotiations. So I think there are several areas where the issues on tariffs have become the sticking point because the two countries are not on the same page as far as tariff reduction is concerned. And some of the sectors include the automobiles, where I think there are huge differences in respect of tariff cuts. You know that these are two sectors where the tariffs in India are significantly higher. And in case of automobiles, in none of the FTAs that India has signed thus far, at least with the major countries, India has reduced tariffs on automobiles. But UK is very keen that auto tariffs come down, and so alcoholic beverages. Then the other sticking point is dairy products, and I believe that on these three issues there are significant differences. The next issue I would say related to the tariffs issue is the whole issue of rules of origin. Now, you know that India has been using the new set of rules on rules of origin, which is the customs administration of rules of origin under trade agreement rules, which is better known as Carotar. And this has, lots of checks and balances on the importers. The onus is on importers And there is a feeling among the trade partners, both existing and the potential, that the Carota rules are too strict, and that whatever concessions India is giving with on one hand, it's taking away with the other by imposing this kind of strict trade rules. Then, of course, services is one area where we all know that UK has substantial interest, where and again, this is a historical legacy of sorts. We have had differences on accounting services, audit services, and legal services. Of course, in the legal services, there is a bit of a silver lining, because there was a recent Bar Council of India resolution to allow foreign lawyers and law firms to practice foreign law in India on a reciprocity basis. So there is a bit of a window opening there. And of course, digital. And if time permits, I can expand on it later. Digital is always a sticking point with all the major countries.
Right. So that brings me to my next question. So all these issues that you just raised, so they are all subject to negotiation. So there are negotiations that are happening like almost every month. But some Indian officials informally have alluded to some red lines in their in current negotiations. So they are saying that there are certain issues. For instance, the IPR issues related to generic medicines and this commitment on data protection and on government procurement, continuing to protect the MSMEs. So they're saying that these are the areas where they would not budge. So these are like the red lines. So how important is it for India to, stay strong in these areas and not make any compromises?
No, I think the question of the whole area of digital rules, and India has still to come out very clearly with the rules relating to data portability and all. This has been, like I said, it's been a sticking point, and in my view, this is very important. Again, this is almost sounds hackneyed. We've all been saying that the new oil of the information economy, and going forward, when you're looking at the the way spreading its wings and what have you, the whole digital world really taking sort of getting a stranglehold on economies, major economies, that is the whole area of digital, in sense that the contentious issues like the free and trusted cross-border data flows, the India's insistence on data localization, and the mandatory requirement of transfer of source codes, algorithms, and encryption keys. Now, these are really the sticking points, but these are also the heart of this whole digital sort of regulation framework that we are looking at from India's point of view. So I think it's very important for India. Then on issue of government procurement, again, we have been saying for decades now that government procurement is extremely important in India for protecting the interests of MSMEs. And this has become even bigger after the pandemic induced downturn, where the biggest hit was on the MSMEs. So I think if at this point, at this juncture, when the economy is recovering, the MSMEs, the government procurement, the huge market that the government provides to the MSMEs, that is taken away from the MSMEs, then it's going to be a big problem. And like MSMEs are the major employment providers. Now, on the question of IPRs, of course, IPRs and the whole issue of the flexibility for promoting the generic the pharmaceutical producers is extremely important. It's almost a lifeline for India in many ways. But then there is a very interesting sort of dynamic playing out from the British side, from the UK side, and sometime back, the National Health Service, the NHS, in its strategic approach, said a very interesting thing, and I just quote what they said. And this was a submission they made to the House of Commons, the committee that was looking at India UK FTA. They said that we will not accept any provisions that will increase the cost of medicines for the NHS. And then they go on to say, and this is the operative part, our commitment to this will not change during our negotiations with India. So, very strangely, we have an ally in the UK. The users of generic medicines are now coming and saying, no, we will not allow any amendment forced by the bilateral FTA. So this is very interesting, actually. We haven't seen this kind of a dynamic, playing out in any FTA till now.
Right. So at least in IPR, we may not expect too much opposition if we try to, continue
We'll
with
get
our
support.
protection.
No, actually, we are
Generic.
getting support on IPR on the generic
Yeah.
medicines issue. We are actually being supported by the NHS. So
Yeah.
that's great
That's
news for us.
wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So, India and the UK are also working on an investment protection agreement. After the finance ministry allowed all the BITs to lapse sometime in 2016-17. So, but there are differences also, especially in the area of dispute settlement. So, could you just briefly explain what these differences are and how serious are these? So, is it possible for the two sides to sit and, basically bridge these differences?
No, I think the way India's new model BIT, the Bilateral Investment Treaty, sets out the investment protection clauses, the ISDS, the Investor State Dispute Settlement Procedures, uh, that will be unacceptable to most of the developed countries. And that is because, the whole ISDS mechanism, the way it has been promoted, it was promoted by the OECD countries, and which all these countries we are negotiating with, be it the UK or the UAE, they are, sort of, their template is based on the OECD model. There, the entire onus is on the foreign investor. The ball really is in the foreign investor's court to, to dictate terms to the state in the event of a dispute. Now, what the Indian model treaty does, and when this was amended, the government had made it very clear that any future investment agreement that India signs with any partner country will have only this framework, this kind of framework of dispute settlement in that agreement and nothing else. Now, this has lots of checks and balances. Now, for instance, the foreign investor can't pull the trigger and just go to an international arbitration because it feels that the domestic courts are they take a lot of time, and they don't get a quick redressal. So built into this dispute settlement procedure of the model act that India has, the model the law that India has, are provisions which say that the first recourse for the foreign investor is to exhaust all remedies in the local courts. They can't actually short circuit this process and then go to the international arbitration. Now that's a big thing, actually. The second issue is that there are a number of areas where they've been excluded. For instance, in case of patents, and this is especially true when it comes to case of compulsory license, where the government issues a compulsory license when a patent holder is charging excessive prices for patented products. So the government can give license to any Indian company to produce this in India. Cases like this will not be considered as, sort of appropriation of the assets of the foreign companies. So there are a number of very strong provisions there. And like in other agreements where we have had problems, we have had differences. I think this difference is also going to play out in case of UK.
So, Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal, he was recently in London, and he held talks with his counterpart, Kemi Badenoch, on the FTA and on these difficult issues. So he said that they were focusing on low-hanging fruits, and were also trying to see, how to move the difficult areas ahead. So what can the two governments actually do at this point of time to speed up talks?
No, I think some of the difficult areas, like for instance, in case of, like I mentioned, some of the sectors in which the tariff negotiations are really becoming very difficult. They should try and find a middle ground. Where things would become very difficult, I feel right on top of this list would be India's rules of origin. I think that is going to be very difficult to get around. Now, how they're going to do it, I'm not too sure. But so all these areas that I just mentioned, these are really some kind of red lines for India. Now, digital is a red line. I don't think that India can move on this issue. On IPRs, of course, it's not as bad as I think, and so rules of origin and digital and dairy products, for instance, lowering tariffs on dairy products. These are areas where I think there will be a lot of hard negotiations, and we'll have to wait and watch how this end game, which they say is going to be played out towards the end of this year, really happens.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dhar, for explaining things so well for our listeners. As the India-UK FTA negotiations, progress further, we hope to have you again here to take forward today's discussion and see, how the situation develops. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure speaking to you, Amity.
Thank you so much. Okay, goodbye to all our listeners and have a great day.